sometimes when we're invited to make a presentation on a topic, it sounds like a good idea at the time, but when the time of the talk comes a little bit closer and you start thinking about it, you say, man, why did I agree to doing this? But in the case of feed efficiency, it really actually spurred us to do a number of things. I asked one of my graduate students, Nestor Guitarras, he actually set aside his PhD project for 3 months and did a lot of work in the literature to start to drill down into feed efficiency at a more fundamental level. I've been working in feed efficiency for a lot of years, and most recently, one of the things that's really neat has happened is that we got a grant from AFRI, USDA, a year and a half ago, a 5-year grant to study feed efficiency in a truly multidisciplinary way. So we have nutritionists, physiologists, microbiologists, ethologists, geneticists, statisticians, all working together to study feed efficiency. And so it truly is a multidisciplinary approach. And the things we're wanting to study is as an example, we selected pigs on relatively high energy, low fiber, corn, soy, choice white grease diets for 20 years. Well, now we're going to lower energy, higher fiber diets. Are those same pigs still superior for feed efficiency? We're going to be looking into, are pigs that have been selected for feed efficiency, are they more susceptible to disease? Are they more easily stressed in terms of social stressors and physical stressors? And the geneticists in particular will be looking for new tools that can be used by the seed stock industry to identify animals that are superior. So I'm going to try to bring some of this all together this morning. I will caution you that we'll start out fairly applied. Bob asked me specifically to get into the science, and I took him very seriously at his word. And we will be moving into more basic science later on. So those of you that are itching for a cup of coffee and don't want to get into basic science, now's be a real good time to take off. I'm actually going to be talking about physical chemistry and the laws of thermodynamics, which blows my mind because 35 years ago I took undergraduate physical chemistry, went into my final exam with a mark of 34, and that's not out of 50, that's out of 100. And I felt like that baseball team that, you know, if they win their last 22 games of the season, and if the top 3 teams in the division completely collapse, I have a chance of getting into the playoffs. Well, I didn't think I had a prayer of passing physical chemistry, and then I learned about statistics, and specifically I learned about the bell curve because all of my classmates were in the same boat. But here I am 35 years later talking about physical chemistry. Later this morning, we've got a breakout session that Bob organized. Charles Stark will be talking about processing and feed efficiency and feed cost. Brent Frederick from Christensen Farms will be talking about how he manages feed efficiency in his system. And Denise Bolio will be talking about alternative ingredients and achieving financial objectives in that manner. So those aspects of feed efficiency are going to be covered. And I can't believe that in this current situation that we're not focusing on those already because they are so critical. And just to put it into a bit of a perspective, this shows the value of 1 point in feed efficiency, and assuming that our wean to finish average feed cost is $440 a ton, it's 58 cents per point. So going from 2.7 to 2.71 is 58 cents. Find me 5 points and I've almost got $3. Find me 10 points and I've got almost $6. That is huge. And the reason I make that point, it was less than a year ago that we were down here and it was only worth about 30 cents. So it's almost doubled. So, you know, the knee-jerk reaction would be, yes, it's doubled and boy, I really got to focus on this. But the real reaction, I think, is we need to look at feed efficiency as Bob has challenged and say, let's really understand the fundamental basis for feed efficiency and see if we can go even further in improving feed efficiency in our farms. Steve Pullman from Murphy Brown West has pointed out quite correctly that feed efficiency is a good thing to measure, but it's a terrible driver for decision making. And this slide explains why. There are so many factors that can influence feed efficiency that if we use it as a driver, it's almost inevitable that the law of unintended consequences is going to come in. right? Just as an example, an unrelated perhaps example, but if we select pigs for reduced back fat and nothing else, the law of unintended consequences comes in and delivers us pigs with a poor appetite, right? So if we inadvertently are making a decision to improve feed efficiency, but we're actually responding to something else that we're not aware of, that can give us some very serious undesirable outcomes. So fundamentally, feed efficiency is influenced by feed composition, the amount of energy in the diet and the source of that energy, and we're going to be talking a fair bit about that. Feed processing, grinding, delivery, and so on. It's influenced by environmental factors. Mike Brum gave a really nice talk on that yesterday in the breakout session on heavy market weights. And then, of course, there's the influence of the pig itself on feed efficiency. But to get us to think a little differently or to challenge ourselves in how we think, feed efficiency is typically expressed pounds of feed per pound of gain. And that embeds in our mind the logic that I've got pounds of feed over here that I'm converting into pounds of pig over here. It's a direct conversion, and my real objective would be to get to 1-to-1. But that's not the way it works. And I'd like to try to explain that. First off, can we get a feed conversion of less than 1-to-1? And the answer is yes, we can. And you probably see that in clinical practice with newly weaned pigs. They get dehydrated, and then they start getting back on water and so on, and you can get a feed efficiency of less than 1-to-1. That's more of an unusual circumstance. But if I could give you a feed that was perfectly digested, it's utilized by the pig 100%. And after the nutrients in that feed are digested and absorbed, and they're utilized by the pig with 100% efficiency to produce tissue, would I get a feed efficiency of 1-to-1? And the answer is no, I would not. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One reason is that as the pig is utilizing the nutrients from feed, there's that other nutrient that we often forget about called water, that as it accumulates protein in the body, it also accumulates water with it. And the amount of water consumed by the pig is not included in the calculation of feed efficiency. But even beyond that, we know that some of the nutrients that are 100% absorbed and 100% utilized are used for maintenance. So you can't have 100% efficient conversion. So this pile of feed here and this pounds of pig over here, one goes to the other, but there's a whole lot of conversions going on in between that dictates what our feed efficiency is going to be. And that's what I'd like to share with you for my presentation this morning. I want to give you an example of how we can be misled or be puzzled by data, at least. This is a study that was done about 10 years ago with Dean Boyd. We took pigs and fed them either ad lib, 100% of their feed intake, or at proportions of that down to 72%. And note that the pigs were all finished to the same final weight. Now, of course, average daily gain went down as feed intake went down. But notice that carcass fat dropped substantially and that carcass protein increased substantially. So these pigs are much more efficient than these pigs, right? Because depositing fat is less efficient than depositing lean. Well, we take a look and we can see the lipid to protein ratio. We're almost getting down to a 1-to-1 ratio, that's a pretty lean pig. And we're looking at the megacals of energy per day, which goes down. So we would expect that these pigs would have better feed efficiency. But they didn't. In fact, feed efficiency was almost constant till we got a bit of noise over here. And I would warrant that p-value, which is significant, is really not a true p-value. And we looked at that data, And we looked at that data and said, how can that be? We're depositing more lean, we're depositing less fat, and yet we're not changing feed efficiency. And the answer was maintenance. Because the pigs on ad lib went to market in 96 days. The pigs, for example, on the 79% of ad lib treatment went to market in 121 days. So we calculated the maintenance cost of the additional days to market, and lo and behold, that explained why we didn't get better feed efficiency for the pigs, even though they had less fat and more lean. Maintenance is a big contributor to feed efficiency. And that's going to be a theme that's going to come through my presentation throughout. And just taking one example of a pig, not an unusual pig, a little bit better than average pig, that's growing 1.9 pounds a day with a feed conversion of 2.58, being fed a kind of a regular diet of 1.5 megacals per pound. And we look at the total amount of energy which is consumed by this pig, which is 7.3 megacals per day, and we can see in this instance at least that 34% of the energy consumed by this pig, of the ME consumed by this pig, goes to maintenance. 34%. And almost 50% goes to fat deposition. So that tells us a little bit that if we want to influence feed efficiency, we need to look at the constituents of energy utilization by the pig. Because to some extent, maintenance is under our control. And the relationship between fat and lean, to some extent, is within our control. Certainly genetically, if not from a management point of view. So, now, I would, just as a quick comment, that 34% is probably on the high range of typical calculations. You might see some calculations as low as 25%. Many of them are in the upper 20s and low 30s. But the bottom line is a significant portion of energy goes to maintenance utilization. So now we talk about how do we express feed efficiency. We can, pounds of feed per pound of gain is straightforward, and it's easy generally in closeouts to get that calculation. We can do energetic efficiency, megacals of energy per unit of gain, per pound of gain or kilogram of gain. We can do feed cost per pound of gain, which is a measure of efficiency of dollar utilization rather than feed utilization, or return over feed cost or return over feed cost per pig or whatever. And the bottom line, however, is that it comes down to, well, what question are we trying to answer? Do we really want the best feed conversion, or do we want the best financial returns? So another reason to look at feed efficiency as a number and to look at it with sort of judicious caution is that it doesn't in any way reflect economics. And I think if we look at feed efficiency without looking at an economic indicator, that can be very, very dangerous. Another example, just to give a sense of how the pig is utilizing feed and energy. This is some data from AgriStats from 2010, 30 million pigs. And this comparison that I saw was a breakdown between the Canadian data and the U.S. data. The Canadian data, I'm guessing, is going to be largely Western Canada because the energy level in the diet, 1.41 megacals per pound or 1,410, that seems more like a Western Canadian diet. And so, of course, the energy concentration in the American diet is higher. So, as we would expect, we get a better feed conversion with from the American diets than from the Canadian diets, 2.7 versus 3. So far, so good. But the growth rate was higher in the Canadian farms reporting than on the American farms reporting. And in a room full of veterinarians, I'm not going to even attempt to explain that. but I just want to make the point that energy concentration and growth rate are related, but not necessarily perfectly. Let's look at caloric efficiency, the kilocalories consumed per unit of gain. In Canada, 41.88. In the U.S., 41.63. So it didn't matter the concentration of energy that was being fed. The energy utilization was the same. So again, it comes down to what is the most cost-effective feeding program for your operation under these market conditions in order to achieve the optimum feed efficiency. So it comes down to how can I deliver those calories at the lowest possible cost, but of course still maintain the growth rate that I need to keep the pigs moving through the barn. So what I'm really leading up to is we don't want to aim for the best feed conversion. We want to aim for the optimal feed conversion that gives us the best financial returns. And that means we have to have a good understanding of feed efficiency and how we're providing feed to the pig in order to determine what is that optimal for our particular circumstance. Let's talk a little bit more about energy. This is just a very simple analysis that I did. It's a little out of date in terms of the cost, but the relative numbers are going to be the same. I formulated a practical diet, but first off, I just put in the energy spec alone. No requirement for amino acids, no requirement for minerals and vitamins. And I end up with a cost of $210 at that time, representing 86% of the cost of the fully balanced diet. So meeting the energy specification for the diet represents about 85% of the total diet cost. We need to understand energy really, really well. And we can go to a lot of scientific conferences and hear a lot of excellent research that's really helped us move forward on amino acids, vitamins, and minerals, and hear almost no talks on energy. And yet meeting the energy spec is a huge component of the cost of getting pigs to market. So needless to say, I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about energy, because Bob only gave me an hour. Okay? And energy is costly. It's become much more costly in the last 6 months, and so I think we want to focus on it for the rest of the talk. And here I get into some physical chemistry and the laws of thermodynamics. And those laws are fundamental for us for understanding energy flux from feed ingredients to animal tissues and to fuel to support life. And the message that I'd like to deliver is whether you are burning or oxidizing nutrients outside the pig in a fire, for example, or inside the pig in tissues, it's the same thing in terms of the energy that's going to be released. The first law of thermodynamics says that energy can change form but can't be created and can't be destroyed. So in other words, we're living on planet Earth and there's a fixed amount of energy, and we're getting energy from the sun. But if we look at a system, energy can change forms, but we can't create energy and we can't destroy energy. We can only change it from one form to the other. So how does this apply to feeding pigs? Well, when we're feeding a pig, the intake of, you warned me about that, Bob, right? ME intake equals energy that's retained in the body by the pig plus the heat that is released by the pig. So they have to be in balance by definition, the first law of thermodynamics. The energy consumed by the pig must equal the energy that's retained in the pig's body plus all energy that is released from the body. And the second law of thermodynamics says that all forms of energy are convertible to heat, or energy can be released as heat. So what this means is, and this is a critical point, and and it might be just me, but I was a long ways out of my PhD before I really got to understand this clearly, that when the pig breaks down starch, for example, consumes starch from corn, and takes that starch and breaks it down to glucose, and then breaks it down to CO2 and water and heat, that amount of heat that's released by that starch in the pig is exactly the same amount of energy that's released when we take that starch and put it into a bomb calorimeter and ignite it and burn it and measure the amount of energy that's released. And that is the fundamental basis of how we are able to understand how energy is utilized by the pig, because we can track energy from outside the pig to inside the pig, all using the same units. And that goes back to research that was done by a guy named Lavoisier in France back in the late 1700s, I believe, mid-1700s. And he had the... I'm going to reveal a little ignorance because I don't know the correct date, but to fund his habit of doing research, he was a tax collector. And during the French Revolution, tax collectors were very unpopular people. They're still unpopular people. Unfortunately, when you were an unpopular person in the French Revolution, you faced the guillotine. And here was an absolutely brilliant scientist. Some people call him the father of modern chemistry. There's a few British researchers who would disagree with that, but the French would call him the father of modern chemistry, and he lost his life at an early age due to the French Revolution. There's also a law that we need to keep in mind, and that's Hess's law, and that heat lost in a net chemical transformation is independent of metabolic path. Okay, so as I said before, the oxidation of 1 gram of fat to CO2 and water in a calorimeter, just the same as the oxidation of fat in the body of the pig. Heat is released from dietary nutrients in very predictable ways. So if we combust carbohydrates, it will release a known quantity of energy. If we oxidize fat, it will release a known quantity of energy. And the same with protein. Now, I'm showing discrete numbers. The actual energy released from a lipid will depend on the specific lipid. It'll vary a little bit. But this is an overall average number. And the same with proteins would vary with the specific amino acids and the number of carbon atoms and so on. But to prove how effective those numbers are, in this experiment that Temi Orsanya did, he did a study where he slaughtered some pigs as an initial slaughter group, and then he fed the rest of the pig either one of 3 different levels of energy, net energy, or 3 levels of feed intake, so it was a 3x3 factorial. He ground up the carcasses at the end of the trial, ground up the carcass of the initial slaughter group because he wanted to measure protein deposition, lipid deposition rates, and also energy retention. But he was able to calculate the energy in the carcass 2 different ways. He measured it directly, that's GE1, and those are the values that he got by taking the ground up carcass, putting it into a bomb, combusting it, and measuring heat release. GE2 was he took the amount of protein that was in the carcass times the factor, and the amount of lipid that was in the carcass times the factor, and those are the numbers that he came up with. And in the kind of research that I do, getting that kind of consistency between 2 methods is about as good as it gets. So the concept works, right? And it's fundamental to how we study energy. I want to talk now about energy systems and how do we measure energy and what's the implications of the manner in which we measure energy and how we utilize energy and how effectively we utilize energy. Because keeping in mind, as nutritionists, our objective in formulating diets is to achieve predictable performance. Predictable growth rate, predictable feed efficiency, predictable feed costs. You can determine in your own mind how successful we are in such predictability. Personally, I think we have a long ways to go. And energy is one of the challenges that we face. The pig consumes gross energy. That's the total amount of energy that exists in the feedstuff. But some of the energy is lost in the feces. And what's left over is called digestible energy. That's very easy to measure. And in fact, when we're doing energy studies now, whether we're doing it at the university or on commercial farms, we will put marker into the diet and collect fecal samples and determine actual DE that is being fed. Because sometimes the amount of energy that we think we formulated into the diet is not the digestible energy content according to the pig. And we need to know that when we're interpreting the results of energy studies. I guess I got a little excited there, didn't I, Bob? Sorry. Take digestible energy, subtract urinary energy, and there's a little bit of gaseous energy, but we ignore that because it's too small to worry about. And we get metabolizable energy, which is the system that's most commonly used here in the United States. And that system has served us well in the past, but it has flaws. And the flaw is this thing called heat increment. Heat increment represents the quantity of energy that is utilized by the pig to convert energy in the diet into a form that can be used in the body for growth or for maintenance and so on. And that heat increment is very low for a starch, for example, but it's relatively high for a fiber and protein, because when you think of it, if I'm a pig and I want to use the energy and amino acids in my body, I have to break those amino acids down, and that means cleaving off the ammonia group and getting rid of that in the urine, and that is energetically expensive. And so fiber and protein are used with less efficiency than starch, and fat is used with greater efficiency than starch. So if we are looking at diets or ingredients that differ in fiber, protein, and fat relative to starch, then ME is not going to do a very good job for us because it doesn't predict the amount of net energy that's available after the cost of assimilating that energy to be used for maintenance and to be used for protein gain in the body, lipid gain in the body, or for milk production. And that's why the Europeans, at least some of the Europeans, not all of the Europeans, but a number of European countries, have been using net energy for some time, because we know their feed costs have been higher than ours for a long time. Why more and more countries are moving to the net energy system, and even within North America, there is at least the beginnings of interest in moving to the net energy system, or at least evaluating it. So the net energy content of a feedstuff equals the net energy that is available for production and the net energy that can be used for maintenance functions. And I want to explain the methods that can be used to determine net energy, because there's two very different methods, and unfortunately they come up with somewhat different results. And that's a problem with the net energy system. If I go, if I go back to here, if I'm using the ME system, if I'm using the net energy system, I am now very close to the pig and how the pig uses energy, because the ingredient variables, the digestibility, the metabolizability, and that heat increment have been accounted for. So now I'm left with the energy that's really there for use by the pig. And we don't understand that as well as we would like to. And so sometimes we get frustrated with the net energy system because it doesn't give us the results that we would like to get. If I'm dealing with metabolizable energy, this is a very large variable. And so it acts as a buffer. And so we still don't have very good precision with ME, but because this heat increment serves as a buffer from the variations of pig utilization of energy, it's more forgiving, whereas the net energy system is not. So the two methods for measuring net energy. One is to determine fasting heat production. That is the amount of energy that's produced in a pig held in a thermal neutral environment and fasting, of course. And that's done in a calorimetry chamber. The pig is all by itself. There's no social stressors. There's no environmental stressors at thermal neutrality. It's a kind of an ideal environment. Indeed, the objective of measuring fasting heat production accurately is to remove any of these variables. So it's a precise method, and it is the foundation for both the French and the Dutch net energy systems. The other method is what we call serial slaughter, where you measure the amount of energy that's retained in the body. And it has the advantage that the pig can be in a group housing situation. It can be exposed to social interaction and other things that normally occur to a pig in commercial production. But the flaw of it is it's not as precise a measurement. There's more variability in it. So that's why the French and the Dutch went with what we call indirect calorimetry method. We need to keep those in mind because if you are looking at net energy values, you must know how they were generated. You absolutely have to. And one of the terrible things that happened with the 1998 NRC publication was that there was a dearth of complete information on net energy values for ingredients, and so values were brought in from both systems. And you just flat out can't do that. And so if you are looking at net energy values, you must ask the question, which method was used? So the DE system is still used in Australia, less so in Canada. The ME system, of course, is used here in the US, in China, and I believe in South America. I'm not quite so familiar. What I do know is that they use ME. The French and the Dutch use the net energy system. Spain has switched to net energy. The UK is now switching over to the net energy system. And the Danes, who have a tremendous history in understanding energy metabolism, and their history in energy goes back many, many decades, they use what's called PPE, or the physiological energy system. They don't even measure it in the pig. This is done strictly in the lab bench, and they measure the amount of ATP that are released by a particular ingredient or diet. And their argument is, and it's very hard to disagree with it, that when you do animal research with animals, that you bring in the variability of animal measurements, and you can be much more precise in the lab bench. And then, of course, the system then is tested in the field to make sure that it works. And the Danish system is a centralized system, so once they decide to adopt it, then virtually everybody's using the PPE system. Now, as we try to understand how energy is utilized by the pig, this quote from Lee Baldwin from Davis, California, is a good one. Because he says that the partition of energy, that's energy intake used for maintenance and for production, into meaningful components is controversial and complex. What he's saying is, this is not an easy subject to study. And that perhaps is one of the reasons why people have avoided it and stayed with what we'll call the empirical system, and I'll come back to that in a few minutes. So let's talk about maintenance energy for a moment. The maintenance requirement is the energy intake that's required to maintain energy balance at zero, and I'll show you a graph to explain that. So it's determined in respiratory chambers, as I mentioned. So you get this equation of fasting heat production, which is a function of body weight raised to an exponent times a constant. And that equation has actually been adopted 40, 50 years ago to show that energy metabolism is somewhat common among species as diverse as a hummingbird and an elephant. And that's why the body weight is raised to an exponent. So in other words, fundamental principles of energy metabolism apply broadly across species, not just within species. But determining maintenance value has been a challenge. These are three estimates for the net energy value based on, for maintenance, relatively recent numbers ranging from 117 kilocalories per kilogram of body weight raised to 0.6 up to 179. That's a big range. The NRC that just came out this year has accepted 197, and basically what they did is they looked at all of the estimates for maintenance value that they felt that the research methodology was appropriate and determined the simple mean. But we recognize, we used to think that maintenance was relatively constant, but now we're starting to understand that it varies substantially, and I'll come back to that. So here's what this looks like in a figure. So just let me explain this. I'm going to use the same figure here 3 or 4 times. So the vertical axis is energy retained by the pig, and this point, this line, represents zero energy retention. In other words, there's no addition of energy to the body of the pig, and there's no loss of energy from the body of the pig. And this is intake along the horizontal axis. This is the amount of energy that's retained. So as we increase energy intake, obviously there's an increase in energy retention in the body. And this value then, this would represent there's no energy retention. This then is the intake at which maintenance occurs. So that's how maintenance energy is determined. Now, notice then that you can also determine fasting heat production and the heat of catabolism. So that's fasting heat production. Remember, the pig in a thermal neutral environment, eating no feed, and this is how much heat it generates. And then you add on to it the energy that's required for the metabolism of food to maintain constant energy balance, and a little bit of activity, and so that's why you get this fasting catabolism value. Notice that the slope of this curve, which is, did I write that? That's supposed to be a km, the line goes through it. But that's the efficiency with which dietary energy is used for maintenance, is different than this slope. Okay? And this slope is the efficiency with which dietary energy is used for gain, kg. So this is, in its simplest form, how the pig is using energy. Below maintenance, it's to maintain the body. As we increase energy above maintenance, then we increase the amount of energy retained in the body. And of course, our challenge is, as producers, is to get as high on this curve as we can, right? We want the pigs to grow quickly. And ideally, we want them to gain lean. So we want to maximize energy intake so that we get maximum gain to the point that we can still afford to do that. Now, that previous graph was a bit simplified because gain can be either as lipid, blue line, or protein, red line. And the efficiency with which the pig uses energy for protein is less than the efficiency with which the pig uses energy for lipid gain. So, the slope of this curve, the efficiency with which the pig uses energy, is dependent on the composition of gain. So if we want to use the net energy system effectively, or the factorial approach to energy requirements that I'll talk about in a minute, we need to know the curve. We need to know our pig. We need to know, as it grows from 50 to 100, 100 to 150, and so on to market, what is the ratio of protein being deposited to fat being deposited? Very, very critical. And we will learn that. We're starting to learn it. We are going to learn it a lot better. We must have that information, okay, in order to do this correctly. I hope the lights are a little bright, so I can't see the look on the face, whether it's puzzlement or boredom or interest, but I'll assume it's interest, okay? I'm a born optimist. Now, when we talk about, I'm going to set that puppy down and leave. Yeah. When we talk about understanding energy metabolism, what we really want to be able to do is say, I'm feeding pig A, or I'm feeding herd A. And I need to provide so much energy for maintenance, I need to provide so much energy for gain, and that gain component will be lean and will be fat. And I want to provide a known amount of energy to that pig so that I will get the outcome that I want, both from a performance and financial point of view. And that's what the factorial approach is all about. And so that retained energy is the total intake of energy minus the energy that's used for maintenance, divided by the efficiency with which the pig uses energy for gain. So these are all factorial estimates. I left a slide out here and I apologize. One equation I really like is the equation that says ME intake, or any intake, doesn't matter. ME intake equals the ME used for maintenance plus the ME used for protein gain plus the ME used for lipid gain. We know the amount of energy that's consumed by the pig. We can measure that very accurately. We know the amount, the efficiency with which the pig uses energy for protein gain and lipid gain. If we know the protein gain and the lipid gain, then we're home free. We know exactly how this pig is going to use that dietary energy. And that's why I like the concept, at least, of the net energy system, because it really forces us to think in those terms. But it is a challenge. The factorial approach is a statistical model. So it represents the energy required by the animal, the energetic contribution of energy from the feed, and it's determined empirical. So what I mean by empirical is you run an experiment, you feed the pigs, you see how fast they grow. That's empirical data. But, as Lee Baldwin said, when we create these equations, the factors and exponents, they are statistically determined, and they don't necessarily have biological relevance. And that's the problem. So we need to move our thinking from just looking at how the pig uses feed to a statistical component of our understanding and a biological component, and bringing those two together. We need to know lipid and protein deposition rates, and we need to get a good understanding of the maintenance energy requirements. One of the problems is this empirical approach, because when we're measuring energy utilization by the pig by running studies, that particular study, the results only apply to that particular circumstance. Is it pigs that are being housed in a barn that's at 80 degrees or 65 degrees? Is it pigs that have a tremendous capacity for good feed intake or poor feed intake? Is it pigs that are healthy versus pigs that are not healthy? Is it genotype A versus genotype B versus C? Empirical data suffers from the fact that, well, it's nice because we feed a bunch of pigs that we can look at, we get some data that we can understand because we get familiar numbers, growth rates, feed conversions, and cost of gain. It's difficult to take that data and apply it to all barns, even within a given system, let alone among systems, because of the differences amongst the pigs that we know to exist. And the joy of a factorial approach is that we can make those adjustments and really grind those costs down, feed costs down to the absolute minimum so that we're getting our pigs to market at the lowest possible feed cost. That's, Julie was talking about eliminating PRRS, and you'd retire when you have accomplished that. I don't have quite as much time as you do, Julie, but I really do believe that while the factorial approach will be challenging and frustrating, the new NRC book is based on the factorial approach, we really need to embrace it and accept the challenge of using it, because the more we use it, the better we will become at applying it on our farms. So let's take a look at how efficient energy sources are used. And so if energy is being used for lipid deposition, lipids are used very, very efficiently. Efficiency of 90%. And glucose is used with an efficiency of 74%, and fiber an efficiency of 62%. So you see, the source of the energy has a tremendous impact on the efficiency with which the energy is going to be used by the pig. And how the pig is using that energy is going to influence the efficiency, all of which means it's going to affect feed efficiency. And if the energy is used for ATP production, which is basically protein accretion and maintenance, we can see that lipids are used with less efficiency, from 90 down to 66%, glucose down a little bit from 74 to 68, and fiber down from 62 to 50. So we need to build that in, and that's why the factorial approach is so valuable to us. Here's the efficiency of different sources if we're using protein versus fat versus starch versus sugars. Proteins are used, has a lower utilization. That's that heat increment that I was talking about. And fat is very high and has high efficiency. Watching time, I'm just going to... This is maybe the most important slide I have left to show. I got a few concluding slides. This is the components of maintenance. And this is where I believe you, as practitioners and as producers, can have an impact on feed efficiency, because if maintenance represents somewhere around 30% of the total energy used by the pig, here's how the pig is using that 30%. And what can we as producers do to influence those functions? Probably not a lot that we're going to do to influence circulation, coordination, respiration, unless there's a pathology and illness going on there that affects respiration and excretion. Membrane transport, just the transport of nutrients across cell membranes, about 26%, 25% of maintenance just goes to that one function. And we can't influence that very much. Protein turnover, basal activity of the pig. The more the pig has to move around to find feed, to get away from other pigs that are causing them social stress, the higher will be the maintenance component. The more the pig has to do to deal with immune challenges, to deal with cold stress, heat stress, any of those components of life that are above and beyond the absolute bare minimum that the pig should need, those are things that we should be paying attention to. Because we can take that 30% and we can lower it, and that's going to improve feed efficiency. So, my take-home messages. Feed efficiency is a valuable monitoring criteria, but probably not a good driver of management decisions. The value of 1 point in feed conversion has almost doubled in the last year, so our thinking has to adjust to this much, much higher cost of feed efficiency. Maintenance represents somewhere around 30 to 35% of the total energy consumed by the pig. So anything that we can do to lower maintenance is going to give us better feed efficiency. Meeting the energy specifications of the diet represents about 85% of the total cost of that diet. So we need to pay attention to how we bring in energy into the diet and how that energy is going to be utilized. And energy metabolism in the body adheres to all of the laws of thermodynamics. Understanding the various constituents of energy use in the factorial approach is critical, I believe, to our success in optimizing feed efficiency in the future. If you've not already done so, start doing some reading on net energy, because you're going to see a lot more of it in the future. The efficiency with which the pig uses dietary energy depends on the source of that energy, proteins versus lipids versus carbohydrates versus fiber, and its fate in the body, protein deposition, lipid deposition, and maintenance. And reducing maintenance is one strategy for improving feed efficiency. Thank you very much.